Do you ever struggle with not feeling good enough? That can be one of the number one reasons why people have a hard time starting their own business or continuing to develop their own business after several frustrating learning experiences or failures. This is my wife, Meg, and she is a language and business coach. And I am Alec from Easier Habits. I coach overthinking entrepreneurs and how to turn their overwhelm and anxiety into unstoppable execution. So one of the things that obviously got me on this thread is we're talking a lot about stress. And one of people's reactions to stress is feeling like I'm not good enough. And that just compounds to the problem. So I've certainly been feeling that as we adjust to health issues and differing, like we need to change up the composition of our businesses, who's working what, who's spending more time with the family, and that is always challenging. And whether you're spending more time with the kids and they're having, I don't know, like behavioral issues, or whether you're all of a sudden trying to scale up your business, usually one of my first reactions is like, I'm not good enough at that. I should be more patient with the kids, or I should be better prepared with a way to scale up my business faster. I should already have that product or service. I should already, have the advertising plan down so that I don't have to scramble like this.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting because I love psychology and just the way that the brain works and understanding negativity bias and the ways that we focus a lot more on those negative things rather than all of the positive that also exists at the same time, right?
Yeah.
And so, because it's the things that we are bad at, our insufficiencies that pose a danger to us. You go way back in history, caveman times, and the stuff that you were good at would get you recognition, but the stuff that you were bad at would get you killed. And so, right? And so we tend to focus, at least I do, on those insufficiencies, those lacks, and anything that isn't 100% perfect. I'm also a perfectionist, and so that's, part of my DNA. And I think it's interesting because when I was younger, I was really good at school, and I thrived in that structured environment with assignments. I knew what was expected of me. And then when I became an adult and had to be in charge of my own life, all of a sudden, all of that structure went out the window and I didn't know how to cope. And not having really struggled with a lot of things, all of a sudden I was met with this anxiety and like, why can't I do this? I was so good at that thing when I was younger and I'm completely failing at this thing now, or so I thought. And so that just kind of ended up in this negative spiral of I'm not good enough, the whatever I broke or something like that.
Did that hit you in your first job? Because you graduated college, you had a job that was high stress and you didn't really like it. You went back to college and then there's a lot of stuff after that. Like when was that hitting you specifically?
I feel like actually, so there was that kind of period in between undergrad and grad school where I wasn't a student anymore. I was looking for a job. I didn't really know what I wanted, or I knew what I wanted, but I didn't think that I could get that or that I should want something else. And so I started going for that other thing, which was a safer path, to be sure. So I thought it would be easier, and it wasn't in any way. But it didn't really hit, I feel like, until we had kids, where I wasn't just responsible for myself, but also for somebody else, right? And even after we were married, it was fine because you're an adult, you're very capable of taking care of yourself. And so if I was ever struggling with those kinds of things, I could work through it on my own. But once you have kids, all of those things that you've tried to hide or manage or duct tape over, that duct tape doesn't hold anymore.
Yeah.
So
you've got to manage that while moving forward on this other front. And the same thing is true when you're running your own small business. If you're working for someone else's business to some extent,
yes,
you can take vacation, you can take sick days, you can retreat. Whereas when you're running your own small business, you have these obligations to like actually make money for yourself, for your family, etc. And that is also an obligation that continues.
And I think that's where a lot of imposter syndrome comes from. People doing things that they don't feel like they were prepared for because they have to learn how to do them on their own. And so when you don't have that structure, you wonder, am I doing this right? Because you're not getting the feedback of,
Right.
you got an A,
Mhm.
right? And so without that positive feedback, it's really easy just to slip into that negative and think, I'm not good enough, even if you are doing just fine.
I mean, kind of like you said, with the structure is harking back to school. You have a teacher who gives you, hopefully not all the time, but like hopefully these clear criteria for
Yes.
like, this is what you need to do to get an A. And in real life, when you're running your own business, you have to find the person, right? You have to find the customer who is going to approve what you do or do not. And they're not necessarily going to have a clear answer. Or the example, like if you ask someone before cars what they wanted in terms of travel, they'd say a faster horse, right? Like some of those problems where it's like they don't even know necessarily what they want. And so you've got to figure out a way to make their life better using their impact, but not even 100% knowing, what there are, like what they need from their own words. And you got to be careful in how you interview people because they have certain biases. One of the big things I saw in tech working for companies is that they would bring people in to ask them about how their UI looked. And if people liked the UI and said it was easier, they'd be like, all right, our product's good to go. But those people were paid to come in and had to click around in the website, and they never really tested the question, does someone want to click into our website in the first place? And it didn't matter the UI at that point. And so it's like, people, asking their own questions. And so it's like when you actually have to create value yourself rather than somebody giving you a framework like, hey, this is high quality, do this and I'll be happy enough. And we'll quibble over your exact salary, but you're pretty much guaranteed something like this. And maybe if you're good, a little bit extra, right? Like that's very different than you may get something, you may get nothing, depending on how you do. And you don't know ahead of time what the criteria for that are.
Yeah. Well, and not only not knowing what the criteria are, not knowing when part, I guess, kind of an offshoot of that is if you don't know what your criteria are, you won't know when you've met them. And so knowing, like, again, I always go back to school. It's the way my brain thinks. With an assignment, you do it, you get feedback, you have a grade that says, this is what you did well, this is what you did poorly. Great. If you don't have criteria, then you don't know when you're done. You can't really know if you've succeeded. And because of that negativity bias, it's easy to see the stuff that, you expected one thing, but it didn't meet that expectation, i.e. it's a failure. Even if those two things aren't necessarily kind of mutually exclusive. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, and as you're talking about that, like the theme of all of this is emerging that basically we're ill prepared to run businesses by the way schools work. That's like a framework for like the first 20 some years of your life.
Yeah. Ill prepared for life, honestly.
Fair enough. And like as you're saying this, and we also have instructional design degrees, so like we're interested in kind of the ways education could be better.
I love education.
So it hurt us so much, but we love it.
It's Stockholm syndrome.
I don't know. But regardless, so one of the things that you're saying about just in terms of the feedback pattern, also that makes us ill prepared and makes us feel like trash when we're in business is in school, right? Even like you might get an F at 50%, but you're getting 50%. And
it's still an outcome.
It's still an outcome, and you have feedback from it.
Yeah.
Whereas when you're starting a business, it's like nobody cares, no outcome, nothing happens, no feedback. Again, and that's even if you do like really good market research. So you're establishing some criteria. You're like, these people express this problem and this need, and I'm trying to fill it. A lot of your initial attempts will be nothing. And then like even before you get your first F, which is like somebody's kind of interested, but they cost as much to acquire as they do like give you money or something like that, is like that's when you even get to F territory, but it's a while before you get to an F, I feel like, in business. And so if your mindset is I'm going to get some kind of feedback without doing this 100 times, then you're setting yourself up for disappointment. And, I think the mind shift there is just you have to change like how much effort before you get any results or even feedback.
Well, and for me, I guess I like the idea of results versus process,
Mm.
right? So are you results oriented and you're focused so much on that first sell, that first client, whatever that first thing is for you? Or are you focused on, I'm going to spend X number of hours doing market research. I'm going to do X number of calls, reaching out to potential clients. I'm going to do X number of something that you can measure. And then all of a sudden, the result is the process, right? And I found that for me, that helps reframe. I'm not going for, happy, well-adjusted children. I'm going for, I will spend, X number of time with them doing something that they enjoy. I can do that. I can't guarantee that will lead to well-adjusted children, but it's something that I feel is good.
Yeah.
And same thing with a business, right? So.
Yeah, what you said rings true. For a while now, several months, I've been in an Alex Hormozy phase. I think, before that I've had, different gurus that I've been to, some more in psychology, like Dr. K, some more in business. But that reminded me of something he said, which is when you're bad at something, you have to ask yourself, is it reasonable for me to be good at that?
Right.
And so, if you haven't put lots of practice into it, like hundreds of reps, then it is unreasonable for you to be good at that. And your goal is to do so many reps, so many, practicing the thing so much that it would be unreasonable for you to be bad at it.
Yeah.
And so it's like, that's, the volume that you're going for. And that's very much a process oriented approach. So I think that's one thing is like shifting away from the results to the process, because the process is something in your control. And if your ego depends more on how good you are at working the process, then that is better. That I think that still lays down some minefields or difficult areas for people who are like more creative and novelty focused, who have a hard time with routine. They're going to start beating themselves up because...
Are you talking about me here?
I'm talking about most entrepreneurs, right? And that's, one of the reasons why I focus on like the overthinking and that.
Yeah.
And I notice that among clients is it tends to be people who are very creative, who have the hardest time with habits, routine, etc. Yeah. And they're really great at exploring new ideas and trying things out, but bad at sticking with them. And so, I don't know, what can we say about like if you're feeling not enough, not because of results, but because process is hard?
I have something there. So I'm going to admit something hugely embarrassing. I have a hard time remembering to brush my teeth. And this has been a lifelong thing. When I was a child, my parents reminded me. I got in pretty good habits after someone said, Meg, your breath stinks in high school. So I was at least really good at doing it in the morning so I wouldn't offend the people I was around. But then once I wasn't around people so much, in the mornings especially, because I'd be doing stuff in my room or whatever, going about my day, not really talking to a lot of people, it just kind of fell away. And so I had all of a sudden this huge block, and I would think, oh, I can do that later. It's not hard. It takes 2 minutes. But for me, there was some sort of difficulty with that routine. And so what I decided was, okay, fine, I won't commit to 2 minutes. I'll commit to 5 seconds. I can do 5 seconds. It is kind of the unreasonable not to be able to do 5 seconds of teeth brushing. That was the absolute minimum that I thought, I can't not do that.
Yeah.
So I started with that. And then I would go a little bit longer and a little bit longer. And it built up successes of where I did it yesterday and the day before that and the day before that. I can do this again, right? So it gave me the confidence that this wasn't so hard. I still forget sometimes. I did this morning, or I didn't forget this morning. I brushed my teeth this morning. And I still don't do it for, the full 2 minutes that my electric toothbrush has. Sometimes I'm like, I'm bored. I can't do this anymore. But I always do at least a minute. And I feel like it's something that I'm still working on. And I think that's okay, right? That it's, even with those process things, it's not about perfection. It's about keeping on trying even after multiple failures.
Yeah.
And that's hard.
Well, and I think shifting then from, am I good enough because I can nail the process? It's more in your control. But am I good enough because I'm making my process this week better than last week? Is one thing I do.
And the thing that I'm trying to learn is I'm good enough even if I don't brush my teeth. However, I want to brush my teeth because I don't want them falling out of my head. And I don't want to have bad breath.
Yeah.
So it's shifting that my value is not tied to brushing my teeth. I'm not a failure because I forgot last night. I don't remember if I forgot last night, but I do this because I want to, not because my worth derives from it.
And that's a little bit more like radical compassion and kindness. Like, find the situation that you're in and how can I be kinder to myself? And that doesn't always mean doing less often. That actually means doing something to improve your process.
Yeah. And I think radical compassion comes into a lot of these feelings of not being enough. Because it's so easy to get down on ourselves and to see all those negative things, to see all of our, weaknesses compared to the strengths that we see in other people on Instagram or, whatever new TikTok thing exists. Sorry, I'm old. Not really, but it's hard to be nice to yourself, right? And so I think being able to do it in some ways, I don't know.
Yeah, I think Tara Brach of Radical Compassion would say, when you find yourself telling the story, I'm not good enough, ask yourself, is it true? Not is it a real thing that you feel, but is it actually true that you're not good enough? And for me, I think one of the other things that's been helping this week is asking, good enough for what? Because
yes,
I'm failing at a lot of things, but that's also because I have set my standards at a certain place and, the goalposts at a certain place. And so, is it, I'm not good enough because, not just because I can't provide for my family, but I'm realizing like, all right, because I don't know how to scale up my business right now, because I have to consider all my funding options, including, do I need to do some coding while I figure out how to scale the client base up? That feels like quitting a little bit to me. And, am I not a good enough coach, right? But that happens very frequently.
Yeah.
Again, like Alex Hormozy in his, I'd heard the story over and over again, and this is part of the reason why we're having these talks about like the difficult part of entrepreneurship, is I'd heard the story of him, helping turn gyms around and how that eventually became a big business. But the story, like the little bit that didn't make it into that most versions of that story that he told, is a bunch of people refunded the memberships that he sold, and the way he was making money is he would take a percentage of the memberships he sold for them and he'd fill their gym. They refunded those so they could get like the people could pay only half the first month, and then the gym owner could get all of the next months. And so he lost all of his money so they could recruit part of theirs, which is really slimy. And you're just like, oh my goodness, that's awful. And that just sunk the business. Yeah. And so for a moment, he turned to his wife, who was doing something more successful, and saying, let's work on your business. And eventually he lucked out because someone called him and said, hey, I want you to turn my gym around. He's like, I'm not doing that anymore. Well, I'll pay you to teach me how to do it. And then he's like, oh, I get the money up front to teach, and you can't refund memberships, and you're willing to pay a lot. Like then he realized he had a business. But there was that moment where he had to kind of step back, and the I'm not good enough moment he had to try something else for a while. I don't know how that long that was. The way he told that story that one time makes it feel short, and I think it can be longer or shorter for some people. I remember a point in time, just because it's an industry that's difficult to make money in, that one of my favorite board game designers, who, if you know anything about cooperative board games, he's the person talks about being part-time UX at a company and part-time board games. So he got to the place where he could fill up half of his career time with his passion and then apply as much of that as he could to his work. And, I thought that was interesting because that was a space he was in for a while. I don't know if with the board game renaissance, he's made it all the way, but, flipping that kind of on its head, it's like, are you willing to do what it takes to provide money?
Yeah.
And then there's also standards of money, like, right? Are there things I could be doing to lower my standards of money rather than putting more stress on myself just to make X amount? So to a certain extent, we did that by moving to Austin during the pandemic when houses were half as expensive as they are now, rather than living in California where like a crappier, smaller house would have still been
ridiculous,
4 times as expensive as the house that we bought at the time we bought it. So
easily. Well, and I'm going to kind of backtrack a little bit to, what you were talking about with, is it true? With that idea of good enough, right? Good enough for what? Even if you're like, okay, good enough for this, is that true? Because, I don't know, like 6 years ago, learning lots of things about myself and, whatever, through various things. But I came to the realization that I might be wrong about some things in life. And I was always so sure about everything, that this is what was good, this is what was bad, this is what brings happiness, this is what brings sadness, and everything made so much sense. And then all of a sudden, I had very clearly pointed out to me in many ways that I was wrong, like straight up wrong about some of those things. And then I started to look back at my history of like, that's why that happened. I was wrong there. That's why I was wrong. I was wrong. And so what I can do now is, in these moments of like, I'm a terrible person, what if I'm wrong? I've been wrong before. I might be wrong about this too.
Yeah.
Right? I might be wrong about thinking I'm a great person too. So there's that kind of like, duality there. But it can help take some of that pressure off, right? That I have to be this. You might be wrong.
Well, and I think one of the big ways that you might be wrong is thinking you have to be good enough for other people.
Exactly.
Because most other people don't care about you and your value. They care, like, most of the time they don't think of you. And when they do think of you, they really, most of the time, think about like what they're getting out of that interaction. So like, if you could just make sure they have a good conversation with you, you can make sure they feel heard, understood, valued, then what they get out of that is they feel valued. They don't really care about your qualifications as much if you're providing that. Now, if you're providing some kind of like service or product, it should work as intended. But like a lot of, especially if you have a service-based business, a lot of what you could do to immediately scale up your business is the quality of interactions you have with your customer. And you don't have to have an MBA to do that. What you need is like to get out of your own head and just be like, it doesn't matter how good I am. How good can I make this person's day?
Yes. I love that so much. Once I can get outside of my head and realize it's not about me, right? What can I do for, this client? I had one this morning that I help her with English, and she's older and amazing, and I love her so much. We were talking about the difference between refrigerators and freezers, mostly in Japanese, but some in English. And so I was like, I was trying to show her pictures and stuff. And then finally I was like, wait, I should just show her mine. And so I brought my laptop downstairs and I showed it to her. And I kind of, was like, this is the refrigerator part. This is the freezer part. The whole thing is a refrigerator. And it was a really great thing. And she was so happy because, and my fear about doing that before was, oh my goodness, she's going to see like the background of my house. My room is messy, right? So I didn't want to do that, but I thought, she's not going to care, even if she does see any of that. This is going to help her. And she was so happy. And I was so happy thinking, okay, I was able to get out of my head, help my client really understand this concept. And it was great. So having more of those. I think having, again, it's that good feedback. So those relationships within, client, service provider, relationship, I think is very important. I also think too, we really help each other a lot with getting perspective, right? Of when one of us is feeling not good enough, we can talk to the other about it. And I feel very lucky in that respect because it's hard to do anything alone.
Yeah.
And so I'm, giving advice now, but if you can have somebody who listens and understands and sometimes who values you more than you value yourself. That's been huge for me.
Yeah, I check in with you every day, and I actually check in with 2 other friends.
He really does.
So, it is helpful to have that and multiple different perspectives. People who have different skill sets, and people who are more or less critical. It helps to have some people who can like tell you hard truths as well. So, that is helpful to just kind of center yourself, get you picking up steam. And the other thing, kind of apropos of the get out of your own head thing, is, social media really can be a dumpster fire. But one thing I love about Twitter is that there's a lot of people who tweet about problems that they have. And so I'll just look up overwhelm and business sometimes, right? And just, give people encouragement or like advice or something to get them, out of where they're stuck. And sometimes that's really helpful. Sometimes, it's just kind of crickets. That's fine. But like, there is something I can do, and I try and do at least, once a week, where I just like, all right, I'm not trying to make money off of anybody. I'm just trying to go and do the thing that I want to be doing, and making someone's day better. And so that's been good. But the other thing I notice when I look for that is actually like, I don't know, on some days a good half of the tweets are actually people talking about how overwhelmed they are by support. Yeah. It's like, oh yeah. Once I look at, the rest of the world and stop fixating on only what's going wrong in my own life, like the world is not such a bad place.
Yeah. Well, and people, individually are people, right? Collectively, sometimes I think that the humanity can get lost, but one of the things that's helped me most as a mom, especially when I was a young mom, new mom, was talking to other people and realizing, oh, I'm not a terrible person because I sometimes don't absolutely love doing this. In fact, sometimes I really hate doing all of this stuff, and so do they, and that's okay, right? We talked about it and talked about the struggles as well as the triumphs, and understanding that the difficulty was normal made it so much easier. These days, actually yesterday I had a great conversation with someone who's going through a lot of health issues as well. She's in her 70s, but I love her, and we have a lot of similar issues actually. And we both just moaned and everything about it, and it was wonderful. And we lifted each other up while also understanding what the other person was going through, and realizing that it's okay that we struggle with these things, that it doesn't define who we are, but it does help us relate to one another in that way. It brought us closer.
So I guess one bomb just to drop on this conversation, kind of food for thought, is that a lot of people who are very successful, a lot of our entrepreneur models are actually people who feel seriously inadequate. And that drives them to overwork. It drives them to do a ginormous volume and keep trying things until they make something work. Is it worth it? And is like, I don't think we hear the story of other people enough who are just like, no, I'm going to accept who I am and just keep learning, kind of like you said, the radical compassion approach, or like get a little bit better. We don't hear that story very much. I don't know whether that's because like media is attracted to dramatic stories, and the people who are really, have something in them that feels inadequate, that drives them to get a lot of success in a short amount of time, are really eye-catching, or whether like that really is a disproportionate path to success in terms of finances. But I think the other thing to think about, and that I keep hearing, is that a lot of people who do get successful, especially if they're driven that way because they feel inadequate, don't suddenly feel adequate because they have money. And that's something I'm reminding myself right now. If I'm not good enough, right, and if I feel stressed out, and I'm thinking somewhere in my head, if I could do this better and this particular stress were removed, all of a sudden I'm going to feel good about myself. I'm like, well, no, not if I've been relying on telling myself how not good I am. I'm just getting in the habit of being not, like, telling myself I'm not good enough.
And so you'll just find another reason.
Right.
And that's so true. Those stories that we tell ourselves. And so rather than doing that, again, with the radical compassion, and then also, kind of just taking a step back and thinking about what matters in your life. Because one of the things that we've always really cared about, I mean, yes, money is necessary for life. And so like we have that as a stressor, like, do we have enough? Are we, keeping all of our bases covered? But also we do care about those other things. We don't want our lives to be all work. We want to spend time with our kids, to have times where we can relax and just be with one another. We don't need a big fancy house, just a roof over our heads that is stable, kind of a thing. And so I think it's knowing what that is for you. And maybe it is financial, and I don't like that. I don't judge. For us, it's more, we want time and we want freedom to do the things that we want to do. And in order to get that, we need X, Y, and Z amount of, money and support and whatever. And so that can be kind of our good enough standard for the time being anyways. It can be a goal to shoot for, and then you figure out the process that you can do these things, working towards that while also finding something in the now to do. And so I think that's something that you've always done really well, is finding time, even when you're busy, when you're working, to be with the kids, to do things with me, to do your own meditation and routines that make you feel well, keeping in touch with people you've always been great at. So I think knowing how you can feed yourself that will build you up during that process is also a vital part of recognizing, that that's good enough.
Yeah, you may want or need a certain business milestone or income. You may be able to relax those standards if you really think about it, like which is more important, the time, the stress versus the business income. But getting those things will not make you happy or think you are good enough. You'll find a new reason not to be good enough. Your goals will naturally shift. You'll have a new goal and you won't be meeting it, and you won't be good enough for that new goal. And so just practicing a little bit of compassion, kindness, acceptance to yourself right now, knowing that none of the like physical, tangible goals that you're setting yourself are really going to validate you in the way you're looking for. Like that sort of validation is pretty much just a daily practice and more of a habit rather than like a goal that you achieve.
Easier habits.
Yay! So with that, it's a great time to sign out. So let's make big changes, one small habit at a time.